So triad examples. I had someone asked me a question about the triads. Said, can you go over the triads more? And I thought that made sense. I should go over the triads and talk about them briefly. The first thing I have to emphasize about the triads is you really want to know the terms. Oh, and was anyone not here that needs a review sheet? Okay. The key thing, of course, is you want to know the terms. And you'll notice at the bottom of the review sheet, I have the terms, right? And the terms are mostly for the matching and for the triad, but some may also show up in the multiple choice. So it's really worth your while to study those terms. And the best way, I think, to study them is with note cards. Usually what I've done, I don't give you, notice all the terms, first of all, are names of people. All the terms are names of people. I don't just, usually when I talk about a person, I don't give you a whole lot of biographical information about them. I'm focused on just a few points about their life. And that's to make a point, a general, larger point about history. So you want to, usually there's 3 or 4 things. Make a note card with the person's name on one side and those 3 or 4 things on the other side. And then you can quiz yourself. Usually the people who had a hard time on the triads, it's because they couldn't identify the terms, or they identified the terms incorrectly. So that's one thing you want to be able to make sure. Make sure you know those terms, make sure you can identify them. It's true there's about 20 terms and only 3 will appear on the triad, but remember 10 of those terms will also be on the matching, and then other ones will show up in the concept questions as well. So I do my best to, not everything on the review sheet will be on the test, but about 90-95% will. So most of it will be. Now I wanted to give an example from American history. I thought this may be a little easier. So the example I gave is George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt. I think key with identifying these triads, identifying saying what these terms are, make sure you know who they are, right? Why are they important? Why do we bother with these people? Who are they that makes them important? Right. For example, Simón Bolívar was important because of his role in obtaining independence for Latin America. Right? He did this by violently overthrowing, or for many Latin American countries, not all of it, but he did this by violently overthrowing these different Latin American countries, overthrowing Spanish rule in different Latin American countries. And even though he freed the countries, he brought them liberation, that didn't necessarily lead to the bringing of liberty within the countries, right? The Spanish American countries that he helped, the Latin American countries he helped establish did not bring a lot of individual freedom to people, right? Most of the power, political and economic, was in the upper classes. So that's something about, for example, Simón Bolívar. So that's who he was, and of course where he was, Latin America. In this case, who and where, these are all American presidents, right? They're presidents from the United States. And what they have in common, and this is the other thing, ask yourself, then you write down the terms, you say who these people are and where they're from, and then look at them and say, what do these 3 terms, what do these 3 people have in common? And I spend a lot of time, I spend a significant amount of time trying to choose good terms. I don't just randomly select the terms. Right? I select the terms with the idea that they do have something important in common. Right? In this case, all these 3 presidents guided the United States through difficult periods in American history. Then you can look at them, though, and say, how were they different? Right? Washington formed a new government, Lincoln preserved the Union, Roosevelt overcame economic difficulties and led the country during World War II. So it's fairly simple. You just want to make sure you can identify those terms. So make sure you identify them, especially who they are, where they are, and then think of those terms, okay, what do these guys have in common? What do these people have in common? And then what do they have different? If you do that, you've basically written it. Now it's good to have at least a 1 or 2 sentence conclusion kind of tying everything together, but this is what I'm looking for.
Can we do it like that? Put who they were, how you have it set up in those little those little hyphens? Can we do that too?
The thing, if you want to use a bullet point list, you don't have to write it in complete sentences, but if you use a bullet point list, I have to clearly understand where you're going. If I have to think, that causes loss of points. It should be very, very clear to me. If that helps you, and one thing you can always outline it in that way and then write it in complete sentences. But the main thing is that I can see where you're kind of going.
With me, when I do triads, because history professors do this in the upper level classes, is that I basically go through each one of them and just specifically say what they are, who they are, like George Washington, He's the founding father of our government. He formed the government. Just basically go and explain each one personally, and then at the end, combine them together on what they're basically all about.
Right.
So that's what I do.
Excellent, thank you, Holly. A good summary. So does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, excellent, excellent. A lot of people, if you have, I've talked to some people who had a little hard time. If you're, come in and talk to me if you're not sure about how to do this. I would encourage you to come in and we can chat. Now, what I did like last time, a lot of people sent me review questions, and I bolded the ones, and we'll just go through them. Okay, how did Britain successfully deal with the difficult economic and political issues it faced in the 19th century? This is one of those questions. Sometimes I'll ask a question that seems really, really difficult, but what I'm looking for is a term that we've used a lot in class. And this, in a sense, has a one-word term that begins with a D. Democracy, right. It's democracy that helps them deal with this, right? You'll remember the British, in Britain, there's this new groups of people rising in power because of the Industrial Revolution, such as the bourgeoisie. Rather than trying to stop the bourgeoisie from having power, the government said, okay, bourgeoisie people, you can vote now too. And then later on, when lower middle class people and working class people are starting to demand more power, they're given the right to vote as well. So Britain manages to stop conflict, or to reduce conflict, by expanding the right to vote, by expanding democracy. And this is key. One thing you want to remember, a lot of times in this class, democracy is important because democracy equals stability. Okay. Through what means was nationalism created? Now this is important. A lot of times I'll give you a list, I'll have like 3 things. That's pretty much a guarantee it's going to be a not question. Which of these is not a means that nationalism was created? So let's see. So let's try and recall. Can anyone give me one of the means? Yes, Michaela.
Conscription.
Conscription. Right, making people join the army. Right, soldiers tend to be nationalistic. Soldiers tend to be patriotic. So we have conscription. Right. Now, most of you have never been conscripted, but I can guarantee pretty much all of you have all done one other thing that builds nationalism. Schools, right. Public education. Right. What was that? Actually, yes, newspapers. Right, exactly. Those are the three things I'm really looking for. Conscription, public education, newspapers. Okay, why did Creoles in Latin America want to obtain independence from Spain and Portugal, and how were they able to obtain it? The first cause is essentially political. Remember, Creoles are people who are of European heritage. They're people of European heritage who were born in Latin America. Right? They're people of European heritage who were born in Latin America. So they're like Spaniards who weren't born in Spain. Right? They're like Spanish. Their mom and dad were Spanish, but they were born in in Latin America. And these people, remember, control. They're the elites. They're the people who are basically in charge of Latin American society for the most part. They've been influenced by European ideas of the Enlightenment, and they want political power. They're tired of the Spanish and the Portuguese telling them what to do, so they want political power. Right? The Creoles want political power. They are tired of people telling them what to do, and in particular, they're tired of being told what to do economically speaking. Right? They don't like being told what to do economically speaking. Remember, we talked about mercantilism, and in mercantilism, you don't have free trade. You're only allowed to trade with the mother country. Right? In mercantilism, you're only allowed to trade with the mother country. Latin Americans didn't like that. Argentina grows beef and lots of grain. The British were going through the Industrial Revolution in the early 19th century. The British people were willing to pay more for their grain and more for their beef than the Spanish. So the Argentinians are kind of like, if we could get independence, we could sell our beef and our grain to the British and make more money. We won't have to sell to Spain anymore. We can sell in the free market. So political and economic reasons. Now, how were they able to obtain it? One thing was just the example. Remember, they're becoming independent in the early 19th century. The United States had already become independent. We had a successful revolution against Britain. And the French had a revolution. So they said it's possible, we can do it. But also, you'll recall that Napoleon defeated Spain. Right? Napoleon actually took over Spain for a while. Well, that's a good time to rebel against a country when it's been taken over by another country. But what's key was this was a violent struggle. Right? This was a violent struggle. It was a military-based revolution, just like our American Revolution. Right? It was a military revolution. So any questions about that? Okay. How did the Spanish-American War both unite and divide Americans? Does anyone remember I showed you that picture? Right? There was a picture of the little girl with the crown, Cuba crown, and then there was the two men that were shaking hands and holding her hands. What did those two men represent? Right, they were Confederacy.
Yeah.
Right, excellent. Thank you, Michaela. Yeah, the North and the South, the Union and the Confederacy. Right, the one guy was wearing the Northern Union blue uniform, the other guy was wearing the Southern gray uniform. And this symbolized that the North and the South were uniting to free Cuba, right, to bring independence and liberty to Cuba. But what's key, though, is remember this is also, though, so it's uniting regions, in a sense, but based on race, right? They were both white. Right? Remember, African Americans, in contrast, differed. African Americans were divided. Some African Americans said, we don't have liberty in the United States. How can we talk about bringing liberty to Cuba? We shouldn't support this war. We should work on bringing liberty to the United States because we African Americans don't have liberty. How can we give it to Cuba when we ourselves don't have it? Other African Americans said, hey, if we fight in this war, we'll prove that we're just as good as the white people. We'll prove we're just as brave and just as good as soldiers as white people, and then they will give us our equal rights. Good theory, it didn't work, unfortunately. But that's basically it, right? It's uniting white Americans who were divided by the Civil War. It's uniting white Americans, but dividing African Americans. The board to do this next one. Okay. So can anyone give me a reason why some Americans supported keeping the Philippines as an American colony? Strategic, right. This will allow us to spread our military power in Asia. Right? This will allow us to spread our military power in Asia. Any other reasons? Kind of linked. I'm sorry?
For the resources.
Right, exactly. And money, resources and money, right? Philippines has some gold, they have some fruit, they have some other useful things that we can take and make money off of. Right? Also, just like the Europeans in Africa, Americans had this idea that we will civilize the Filipinos. Right? The Filipinos need civilizing. Right? So we're going to take them over for their own good. Right? We're going to take them over for their own good and help them get civilized. And then part of it was we're as good as Europeans. Right? Europeans have empires. So why not us, right? Europeans have empires, so why not us? So that's supporting. What's the reason why some Americans opposed?
It wasn't a country. It wasn't considered a country in the United States.
I'm sorry?
It wasn't considered like a country in the United States.
Right. Exactly, we can say they're inferior people. Mm-hmm. Right, there's this idea, and we'll come back to this with question 7. They're inferior people. Right, if we bring these Filipinos, these racially inferior people into the United States, it will make the United States weaker. Right, so this is kind of a bad reason, right? It's basically racism, right? We don't want those Filipinos here. They're going to bring us down because they're brown people and are therefore biologically inferior. And we'll come back to that later. What's maybe a more positive reason?
They fought for their freedom. They should be free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they fought for their freedom. They fought for their freedom, just like us, right? Just like the United States. We Americans We were colonized, and we stood up and fought for our liberty. Why are we going to take it away from the Filipinos? This is a violation of our heritage. This is a violation of our heritage. And the last one was that it was unconstitutional. That it was illegal. The Americans couldn't constitutionally take over a colony, was one argument. So any questions on that? Okay, continuing on. This is number 7 still, that one. I wanted to go into more detail about this because a lot of people asked me this question. So I just made a slide to talk about it. So what is the connection between social Darwinism, eugenics, and nationalism? Well, first of all, remember, nationalism is this idea that each nation should have its own state, right? Each nation should have its own state, and your primary loyalty should be to that state. Okay. You also then want your nation state to be strong, right? You're proud of your country. You want your country to do the best it can be. You want your nation state to be strong. So how does that connect with social Darwinism? Well, remember, social Darwinism says, Darwin had this idea of survival of the fittest, right? If an animal is fit, if it's strong, it will survive and reproduce. If it's weak, it'll be eaten and its species will go extinct. So social Darwinism was the application of this idea of survival of the fittest to human nations, societies, or races. So there's this idea that humans, we're actually competing with each other, right? Our Chinese people are competing against American people, white people are competing against brown people. There's all this competition going on. And the weak will be destroyed. Right? This is just scientific. This is just how the world works. So just kind of don't complain. Just kind of accept it. The weak are just going to be destroyed. They're going to lose out in this system. But of course, if you're a nationalist, you don't want that to happen to your nation. Right? Social Darwinism is very threatening in a sense if you're a nationalist, because it means that you can go extinct. It means that if your nation, which is where remember the nation state's where your first loyalty should be, if your nation becomes weak, it will get defeated and eaten, and as a loyal patriot, you don't want that to happen. So that led many people to embrace this ideology that was similar to social Darwinism, eugenics. Remember, eugenics means good birth, right? It's the U of euthanasia. Euthanasia means good death. Eugenics means good birth, and genics is like Genesis from the Bible. So eugenics, good birth. And this was this idea that we don't need to wait for evolution to happen. We can guide human evolution to make the nation/society/race stronger by encouraging fit people to have children and preventing unfit people from having children. Right? That's why people didn't want this inferior people, these Filipinos, to be a part of the United States because they were unfit. And they'll bring down our nation. They'll bring down our race. So we're going to encourage fit people to have children and prevent unpeople from having children. That way our nation will be able to succeed in the social Darwinist contest. Right? In the social Darwinist struggle, our nation will win out. Our nation will succeed. So, any questions about that? Yes, Ashley.
How does eugenics relate to nationalism?
Well, it promises to make your nation stronger, right? Because you're encouraging the fittest people in your nation to have children, and you're discouraging unfit people in your nation from having children. And then so that way your nation will become fitter and stronger over time. So let's see. Okay, and this was similar. What also was connected to this, I'll go back if people weren't able to finish copying what they wanted from that slide. How were biological concepts of race used to justify imperialism in Africa? Well, there was the belief that if your race was superior, it was your right to go out and take over the land of inferior races. And this idea, I want you to particularly connect it to Cecil Rhodes. Right? On your terms list, there's a guy, Cecil Rhodes. He was a social Darwinist. And I had a PowerPoint slide where I included a quote from him where he said, "We Anglo-Saxons, a particular kind of European, we Anglo-Saxons are the best race. And wherever we go, and whatever land we control, it's good for the human race." Right? So if we go to take over parts of Africa, it actually helps Africans, is this kind of argument, because we're the best race. Africans don't know how to govern themselves properly because they're biologically inferior, whereas we Anglo-Saxons are biologically superior. So if we go in and take over, that's going to help them. Right? And that was what many Europeans thought. They thought we have this technology, we have this power because we're a superior race. And I gave 2 examples that challenged that European idea of racial superiority. And the first one was this battle of Isandlwana. Right, this battle of Isandlwana. Does anyone remember, can anyone tell me one country or one group what was one of the sides that fought in this battle? Right, who fought in this?
Ethiopia?
Ottawa. Close. British were one side, exactly. And they fought against? Zulus. Yes, excellent. They fought against the Zulus. And who wins?
Zulus.
Right, the Zulus win the battle. Right, the Zulus win this battle because they're so disciplined. So even though the British have this very powerful advanced army, the Zulus are able to win. Even though they're only armed. Remember, the British have guns, they have rifles, I think they have some machine guns, they have rockets, they have really advanced weaponry. The Zulus have spears and spears and shields made of cowhide. You know, not particularly powerful weapons, but because the Zulus are so organized and disciplined, they're able to defeat the British in this battle. Right? So it's not, Africans do resist, and they can resist effectively. There's nothing racially inferior about Africans or racially superior about Europeans. What's different is the Europeans have the Industrial Revolution, right? That answers question 4. What made the European colonization of Africa possible? It's the Industrial Revolution, right? And again, this is Cecil Rhodes. Remember Cecil Rhodes? He invades this African country not by leading a British army. He makes his own army. He actually hires an army and buys them machine guns. Right? A common person, or I shouldn't say common person, he was very wealthy, but an individual was able to buy the most advanced technology available and use it to equip his own army. That's because the Industrial Revolution allows you to manufacture advanced technology very cheaply. Right? So it's the Industrial Revolution that makes the European colonization of Africa possible, not racial superiority. And one example we see is that the Zulus, because of their disciplined organization, are able to defeat the British. If Zulus would have had machine guns, maybe they could have maintained their independence. Art.
Who fought the Ottawa?
Right, Battle of Ottawa. Yeah, excellent. That happens later. As Holly pointed out earlier, it's Ethiopia on the African side. European side's a little tricky. Does anyone remember the Europeans that fought? Italy. And again, it's the Africans who win. And this isn't, Ottawa refers to a battle, but the Ethiopians don't just win the battle, they actually win the war. And they win the war much for the same reasons, or the strength that allows them to win in the war is because they do things similar to what Europeans have done. Ethiopia has a strong, centralized state, like European countries, and they have modern weapons. So Africans could do just fine once they had technology, right? And they could have developed technology if their historical situation would have been a little different, right? If Shaka Zulu would have been born 400 years earlier, things may have been different. If he would have been born in the 13th century instead of the 18th century, things may have been different. So any questions about that? Okay. Need to go a little faster. Okay, so how did British policy change in India? Well, remember when British people first come to India, they come to trade, right? The British first come to trade in India. They're not there to change Indians. So they follow a policy of religious tolerance, right? The British are not interested in changing India. The British do not come in the 18th century, early 18th century, to change India. They're there to trade. So they bring religious tolerance. What happens though, this is the question, why did the British increase taking over India? The Mughal Empire falls apart. And that led to war between the different successor states, right? And so the British, in order to ensure trade, established their own government. right? They initially follow a policy of religious tolerance to bring trade, but then the Mughal Empire falls apart. That leads to war. War is bad for trade. It's hard to trade to different countries, between different countries if there's a war going on. So the British actually start establishing their own government. In India. The British actually start establishing their own government in India. And this leads them, so they have their own government, and this leads them to start saying, hey, we need to civilize the Indians, and we need to Christianize the Indians, right? So that leads to a policy of religious intolerance. For example, guided by notions of civilization and Christianity, the British outlawed sati. They outlawed the burning of widows. Right? They said this is bad. We shouldn't burn widows. In the first part, when they were just interested in trade, they didn't care. Let them burn widows if they want. In the second part, because they're here to civilize the Indians and Christianize them, they adopt a policy of religious intolerance. And that's why you had this change in policy. Any questions on that? That's related to question 7. What led to the Indian Rebellion? This did. This change in policy is what led to the Indian Rebellion. Religious intolerance. Right, remember, the reason that the spark that actually starts the rebellion is this rumor that the British are using these cartridges that are greased with pig fat and with beef fat. All right, why did the Qing Empire reject the scientific, industrial, and political revolutions that made the West so powerful? Well, first, in the Qing, you have these guys who are Confucian exam takers. Right? Remember, the exam they take is on moral knowledge. Right? It's Confucian moral knowledge, not technical knowledge. But science and industry requires technical knowledge. Right? Science and industry requires technical knowledge. So the Confucian exam takers, these Confucian elites, don't want this change. They don't want to bring in the scientific industrial revolutions because it threatens their power, right? Right? Because if you spent all your life studying moral knowledge, and you're either preparing to take the exam or you've taken the exam and passed it, and you get power in society based on moral knowledge, you don't want scientific and industrial knowledge to suddenly become more powerful. That will make you weaker. Because you don't know about that. You know about moral knowledge. So because of this, Confucian elites oppose these kind of transformations. Right? And if you're the Qing dynasty, right, you oppose the political revolution, you oppose nationalism. Right? Remember, we talked about nationalism makes you strong, but the problem is nationalism will lead to the overthrow of the dynasty. Right? Nationalism will lead to the overthrow of the Qing dynasty. Because the Han Chinese people will say, why are these Manchus ruling us? Right? Let's get rid of them. We want to be ruled by Han Chinese people. Remember, nationalism says your own nation should rule itself. You shouldn't be ruled by these people different than you. And would also lead to division. Right? Under the principles of nationalism, each nation should have its own state. Tibet would be independent, Mongolia would be independent, Manchuria would be independent, China would be independent. So the empire would split apart. And of course, democracy is bad, right? Because you don't elect the emperor. Right? Remember, you gain power in Chinese society, either emperor, and you were emperor because your dad was emperor, and your family is emperors because you got the mandate of heaven. So that has nothing to do with democracy. And if you got your government position because you took the exams, you don't like democracy either. Right? So in the short answer, all of these, the scientific, industrial, and political revolutions, threatened the power of Chinese elites. Right? They all threatened the power of Chinese elites. Right? All three of these things threatened the power of Chinese elites. In Japan, it was completely different. Right? Remember, in Japan, you had this thing called the Meiji Restoration in 1868. Yeah, the Meiji Restoration in 1868. That led to the rise. Let's see if I can trace this top part. That led to the rise of radical samurai nationalists. Right. These guys, they were nationalists. They didn't care. Anything that helped the nation state promised to make them stronger. So they wanted to adopt these revolutions because these revolutions promised to make them stronger. Remember, Japan, even before the Meiji Restoration, adopted Western science because it worked. It didn't threaten their identity. Right? It didn't threaten their identity. They didn't gain power because of Confucian moral knowledge. So it didn't bother them to adopt Western knowledge. Right? It didn't bother them to adopt Western knowledge. They said, Confucian moral knowledge, that's fine. Or I'm sorry, Western science, that's fine, doesn't hurt us. Industrialization doesn't hurt us, it'll make us powerful. Japan was not divided into different nations. Japan is homogenous. So nationalism didn't threaten to destroy Japan. It didn't threaten to divide Japan. And in fact, adopting democracy and nationalism promised to make Japan more powerful. So in the Japanese case, these three revolutions promised to make these guys, the radical samurai nationalists, who were the elites, it promised to make them more powerful. So to put it in summary, the Qing Empire rejected these revolutions because it promised to destroy the power of the elites. Promised to destroy the power of the elites. Meiji Japan embraced them, though, because it promised to make the elites more powerful, because it would make the nation state that the elites governed more powerful. A lot of times, one thing I want to stress when I give you like a comparison question, try and remember, a lot of times I'm trying to deal with opposites. I'm trying to deal with big differences. So one thing you also want to make sure you understand is which country these are connected with. So it's Taiping, China, or Japan?
China.
China, right. Want to remember that's China. Okay. So this is the Taiping Rebellion. So it's, you know it's a fight. You know it's a struggle. Okay. Did it last a long time or a short time? Long, yes, long time. Remember, it lasted over a decade. Did it kill a lot of people or a few people?
A lot.
A lot of people, yeah, 20 million. Was China stronger or weaker after the rebellion? Weaker. Right, it made the Qing Empire weaker. They fought this war, all these people died, it didn't solve anything. Remember, they actually needed the help of Europeans to end the war. They actually needed the help of Europeans to actually put down the rebellion. So China has kind of bad luck here, right? China is involved in this war that lasts over a decade, a long time, kills a lot of people, and it just made them weaker. It didn't help the Qing Empire, it didn't help China at all. The Japanese, though, in contrast, were very lucky. The Meiji Restoration, and the restoration means bringing the emperor back into power. Meiji Restoration gets rid of the shogun, overthrows the shogun, brings these radical samurai nationalists into power in the name of the Meiji emperor. Right? Was this a long or a short war? Short. Yeah, it lasted less than a year. Kill a lot of people or a few? Few people, right? Few people died. Didn't kill very many people at all. Was Japan stronger or weaker? Stronger. Right? So it's opposites. And this is one reason why Japan is going to one thing I was just trying to point out was why is it China and Japan act very differently in the 19th century? Part of it just also has to do with luck, with good fortune. China was very unfortunate, had kind of bad luck. It was involved in this war. It lasted a long time, killed a lot of people, didn't solve anything. Japan, though, in contrast, was very fortunate. It was involved in a very short war, killed very few people, that made Japan stronger because it brought to power those radical samurai nationalists. Right? It brought to power the radical samurai nationalists. Okay. Chapter 23, why did civilians become targets during World War I?
Because they supplied the ammunition for
Yeah, exactly.
different stuff.
Exactly. World War I is a fight not simply between armies, it's a war between industrialized nation states. It's a war between two societies, right? And this, as Negasia correctly pointed out, the war, the idea was you had to mobilize people to work in civilians to work in factories to supply the soldiers. So they become targets because they're actively taking part in the war effort, right? They're actively taking part in the war effort, right? Number 4, what determined which side would win the war? Does anyone remember what sporting event did I compare this war to? Marathon, exactly. A marathon is a test of endurance. Marathon isn't testing if you're the fastest runner. That's what a sprint does. Marathon is seeing who can run the longest time. And in this case, it's measuring your industrial endurance. It's measuring your industrial endurance. So what determined which side would win the war was its industrial capacity, its ability to keep fighting, to keep supplying troops, to keep bringing troops into the war. Right? Remember, Russia was only half industrialized, so it lasted until 1917. The United States was very important to ending the war, not because Americans were great soldiers at that time. We weren't. Our soldiers were inexperienced, but there was a lot of them. They were well-fed, and they had lots of weapons and ammunition. The Germans didn't. Right, so this was a marathon. Who can last the longest? Right? How did the Versailles Treaty punish Germany?
They had to pay a reparations.
Right. Excellent. They have to pay reparations, which is money, reparations. Right, connected to that, the Germans were humiliated. They had to take the blame.
Lost their army.
Right, exactly. And there's limits on the German army.
Didn't it divide their territory? I mean, Prussia became part of Poland.
Right, and they lost territory. Excellent. Yeah, you got them all. Excellent. People really know World War I well. Going to chapter 24. Okay, what sort of state did Ataturk establish? Okay, first of all, what country is he connected with?
Turkey.
Turkey, right. The clue is Ataturk. Ataturk. It means father of the Turks. And what was this government in relationship with Islam?
Secular.
Right, it's a secular state. He wanted to form a modern, European-style secular state. It's meant to be a secular government. Means a non-religious government. Secular, anytime you heard the word secular, it means a non-religious government. Anytime I use a word that you don't know, feel free to ask. But yeah, secular means non-religious. So Islam is supposed to have nothing to do with the Turkish government. Now, how did religion divide Indians? Okay, what were the two religions that existed in India?
Hindu and Muslim.
Hinduism and Islam. Yeah, those are the two major ones. Christianity is still there, but it's only about 2% of the Indian population. So it's there, but it's not what I'm looking for here. Right. You had Hindus and Muslims. They had a difficult history together, right? Because the Muslims conquered the Hindus. And you can kind of think of that, remember that image I showed of Gandhi. Now Gandhi wanted to unite Hindus and Muslims. Gandhi wanted to unite Hindus and Muslims. But in order to mobilize the mass of Indians, most Indian people, remember he dressed like a Hindu holy man. Right, I showed you that picture. He's not even wearing a shirt. To Muslims, that's scandalous. You're supposed to wear clothes. Like in conservative Islamic countries, Islamic soccer players wear long pants to play soccer because they shouldn't show their bodies. So even though Gandhi wanted to unite Indians, be they Hindu or Muslim, he wasn't able to, in part because he had to draw on Hindu ideas to try and mobilize people. So what happened, nationalism in India failed to overcome religion. Right? Nationalism failed to overcome religion. In the United States, nationalism is usually more important, is more powerful than religion, right? Americans are willing to disregard their religious beliefs for the most part to unite together to serve the country. In India, that didn't happen. There was a conflict between Hindus and Muslims that led to the division of India into Muslim Pakistan and mostly Hindu India. Question 6, why did Ho Chi Minh turn away from liberal democracy and towards communism? The quick answer to that, he was a nationalist. His goal was to get independence for his country. Remember, most communists were nationalists first. Right? Ho Chi Minh is like that. Mao Zedong and other Chinese were like that. The liberal democracies were not going to help him get independence, but he thought communism would. Right? The communists promised to help him obtain independence. So the quick answer is because the communists promised to help him get Vietnam gain national independence. Why did Japan turn away from the West after embracing Western culture and democracy? Right, the Great Depression. Liberal democracy in Japan was not able to deal with the problems of the Great Depression, so people embraced militarism. Okay, I'll just go quickly. We have just 2 more minutes. I just want to give people opportunity. Any questions here? 21. Oops. 22. 23. Bottom one. What is managed capitalism? Okay, remember, Adam Smith said that you should have free market capitalism. Government should not intervene. During the Depression, though, that wasn't working. So Franklin Roosevelt followed the policy of John Maynard Keynes. Right? John Maynard Keynes is a termlist. Keynes said we need to borrow money. The government needs to borrow money and spend that money to stimulate the economy. Remember, Adam Smith said government stay out of the economy. Managed capitalism says the government should intervene in the economy. And that's important. This government intervention in the economy allowed the United States to remain a liberal democracy. Right? This allows the United States to remain a liberal democracy. Our government survives. Germany, Italy, and Japan weren't able to do that. Their democracies were overthrown. And then, of course, they become the Axis powers, and then you have World War II. So why is it important? It preserves democracy. So on that note, we will end. Good luck on Wednesday. Feel free to come drop by if you have any questions or you want to go over your test.